Greetings, spiritual pilgrims. I apologize for having to do this lesson old style, which means I'm going to have my head down quite a bit more than I like having it down for a video recording. But I don't have my computer in here yet, but the office is coming along beautifully, and the studio, which is on that side, is set up very nicely. And a big thank you to Remnant Church for providing your pastor with just an absolutely lovely office. It will be a very nice place to do my studies, and a lovely environment to do any ministry or counseling that I must do. If you are new to the channel, I welcome you. It is a joy to share this time of spiritual contemplation with you. Please see the comments below to visit Remnant Church's web pages and other video lessons and sermons. I will also include a link to Tithe.ly so that if the Lord leads you, you may support the ministries of Remnant Church. We are 501c3, so donations through Tithe.ly are tax deductible. Again, welcome, and may some small thing that we do help the Lord do something amazing for you. This week, we will be reading 2 short chapters from Pilgrim's Regress, sorry. Book 10, chapters 1 through 2, if you would like to read along. The reason I'm keeping it short this week, and actually it's not so short after I did it the first couple of times. I thought it was going to be short. The reason that I thought I was going to keep it short this week is that I found myself emotionally overwhelmed during my personal studies of these chapters. They struck me to my core in a good way. And I hope that they do you as well. It's a very meaningful couple of chapters, very dense for such small chapters. Quite a bit going on, and because there's quite a bit going on, we're going to do it a little bit differently to help viewers and listeners find their way through the maze of these 2 chapters. The Lord usually helps me compose myself for lessons and sermons, but I was joyfully weeping even while writing out the script for this lesson. Before we read it, I want to do something that I've not done in previous videos for this study. This is perhaps the densest with disparate and strange knowledge in the book. It draws on everything from theology, philosophy, sadism and masochism in their classical senses, not in their sexual senses, thelema and thelemites, and if you've ever read that word before, I read it thelemites forever, but it's pronounced thelemites. I want to define some words ahead of time in order to make the reading clearer to those who may not know Latin. I don't know Latin, but I can look it up and figure out what I need to know for a sentence. Or the concepts behind the religion of thelema, really one of the most evil religions out there. Thelema is, to me, they would argue with me on this, but to me is synonymous with Satanism and Luciferianism. I don't know Latin, so thank you very much, Marion E. Wade, the person responsible for the annotated version. So let us begin with some definitions, translations, and brief descriptions of some of Lewis's more vague references. The guide, Slickestein Saga, and we're not going to go into what that name means because we did it in a previous video. If you are interested and you haven't been keeping up with each video, that definition is out there. If you go to your book and find where the word first appears and then go to those videos, you'll see his name discussed and what his name means. But Slickestein Saga, it's taken me forever to learn how to say that word that quickly, is said to equip John and virtue at all points. All points. Now, when I think of all points, I think of in, around, that which protects my spirit and guides my soul's thoughts, and that which protects me on the outside from the world's corruption and from the lies of the evil one. This is an indication that the 2 pilgrims who have crossed the uncrossable divide with the help of Mother Kirk or aka the church, are now wearing their holy armor. Ephesians 6:13-17 says this, and if you've been a Christian for even a modest amount of time, you have heard this and may have memorized it. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, and hasn't it come, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand, stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Now, I think if you read that over and over again to yourself, I don't think you ever run into worry about their feelings. I don't think you ever run into compromise for peace. What you have here is stand, stand, stand. Christians have done too much compromise. Christians have done too much bending. Christians have done too much sitting down. And unfortunately, over the last 3 years, Christians have done too much sticking their heads in the sand. Time to stand. If you are to spiritually survive this world, then you need at least a rudimentary understanding of how to don the holy fortifications. If you remember, King David, when he was just a boy, tried to put on fortifications that would not fit him. And so he wore his holy fortifications and took down a giant. Here they come. There are also 2 land bridges that our heroes are told that they must cross over and be in the company of dragons before they will be fully equipped for the progress that they are now making, since the regress is now over. Virtue is not very happy about this news, and none of us are when we awaken to our own dragons. But safety is not the realm of heroes. Safety is the realm of cowards. More on this later. The land bridges are named Isthmus Sadisticus and Isthmus Masochisticus, sadism and masochism. And again, it's not in their sexual sense, but in their classical sense. Sadism is an error on the side of austerity, while masochism is an error on the side of overindulgence and laziness. Neither road will do for the Christian. The narrow path lies between the two, but a man must be hardened by sadistic and softened by masochistic before he can have true wisdom about the way. Now, when I say that, I don't say he must participate in these ways of living, just that he must know them, and know them in such a way as to know that they must be avoided. Unfortunately, for most of us, a word to the wise is not enough, and we must learn to slay these dragons the hard way before continuing our path. The word costive means literally constipation, and we will run into that word when we run into the dragon of sadism. When Virtue sings his song, he mentions the 10th hierarchy, and the angels of heaven traditionally have 9 hierarchies. Therefore, you got the 9 hierarchies of angel. Therefore, the 10th hierarchy, or the 10th order to be, should I say created, or should I say perverted, would have to be Lucifer and the fallen angels who comprise an order of the fallen and separated forever from the other 9. The 10th hierarchy is forever cursed. Wormwood is another name for Lucifer, and we're going to run into the name Wormwood, and Lewis, of course, in his Screwtape Letters. Wormwood is the young demon who is getting tutored by his superior demon, but Wormwood is actually a name that has been used throughout time for Lucifer. It is also, and this is the first. This is where I first ran into the word, was when I was young and reading eschatology or end time books. It is also the name of the asteroid that is mentioned in Revelation. And if I have my facts right, it is also what some are calling the asteroid that is scheduled to crash into the Earth sometime in 2029. We shall see. And that's a little frightening and eerie, isn't it? I don't know if it really is the asteroid spoken of in Revelation. I make no such claim. Or even if it will indeed hit the Earth. We shall see. But know this. Even if it is, if you are armored up and standing and following Christ and your oil is full, then everything will work out for you just as it was meant to work out for you from the time God wrote your story before you were even born. Have no fear, Jesus says. Fear not, God says. Fear not. And of a lesser caliber, but still influential, Frank Herbert of Dune says, fear is the mind killer. More on this later. Ahriman is the Zoroastrian devil. And again, remember, we're talking about the words that occur in Virtue's song, and we'll run into that in the reading. Ahriman is the Zoroastrian devil. That is really all you need to know for this reading. A deeper study of Zoroaster and Ahriman is very fascinating, but not necessary to get the gist of what Virtue is trying to convey to us in today's reading. The next difficult line in the book is a line of Latin, and I believe it's pronounced habe caritatem et fac quod vis, and that translates to have charity and do what you will. Now, at first blush, that don't sound too bad. But you start out opening up that sentence, and what you have is the exact tenets of the Thelemites. And we're going to get more into that, so try to remember where we first encountered that. This, of course, is another way of saying the base tenet of Aleister Crowley's Thelema. There is no law, says Crowley, beyond, whatever was channeled through Crowley's woman at the time. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. Love is the law, love under will. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, especially if you're not familiar with that. You're thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't sound so bad. It is. It is the worst. This is a religion that once you follow it long enough, you realize that it is a religion of self-apotheosis. Crowley was a sick and twisted man who died a sick pauper. Yet still, his religion of the godhood of the self has had more harm on the culture than most people fully understand. Our culture has been so affected by it that most of these satanic tenets are now common practices amongst the population, and it infects nearly every story in the media. And because of that, it feels like what is, and because it feels like what is, most people don't research it far enough back to find out how we got to this dreaded isness. Nearly every foul thing that is considered normal nowadays, the great inversion of Luciferianism, which has led the blind masses to defend evil, and to defend evil as good, and good as evil. This concept can be traced back to Crowley, as Ozzy would say, Crowley and his acolytes. Many of the greatest influencers and artists of our time had a dread fascination with the teachings of the madman. Led Zeppelin was interested in them. Black Sabbath was interested in him. Many more. One of the most famous Thelemites, and you can see him wearing his astral travel jumpsuit spandex on a couple of his album covers, was David Bowie himself. His music is absolutely littered with Crowleyism. Oddly enough, Ozzy Osbourne told us exactly who Crowley was in his classic Mr. Crowley. And that song is on the Blizzard of Oz album. The song starts with this description of the greatest warlock of our era. Mr. Crowley, what went on in your head? Oh, Mr. Crowley, did you talk to the dead? Your lifestyle to me seems so tragic. With the thrill of it all, you fooled all the people with magic. Yep, you waited on Satan's call, and all who follow the fool Crowley receive for their trouble the riches of the earth. And by that I mean rust, moth, and decay. And then for that trouble, they lose their very souls. Not a very good trade, if you ask me. And so now we have enough info to read the chapters. But I would like to spend a few moments talking to you about fear and why Christians cannot afford themselves the luxury of cowardice because of all the many, many themes that are in these two chapters. The theme that jumps out in almost every sentence is the theme of you have now crossed the divide because Mother Church has carried you there. The blood of Jesus Christ has prepared the way and built the bridge. And now you have to decide, are you going to trust in God? And if you trust in God, then all fear is abolished. I'd like to spend a few moments talking to you about that fear. Our world went to hell in a handbasket on January 9, 2020, when the World Health Organization announced a mysterious coronavirus-related pneumonia in Wuhan, China. Everyone is familiar with the madhouse and the asylum that the world turned into in the oncoming months. And God help you if you didn't think it was an asylum. You're still buying the lie. We are still a madhouse, and unfortunately, I believe that the lunatics have gotten even crazier. Because even if the madness has morphed into the progressive still trying to cling to any false narrative and derived crisis to get their way with a new world order where you will supposedly own nothing and supposedly be happy about it. As a side note for the habitually ignorant, owning nothing and being happy is what every slave driver tells their cattle and their chattel when they are whipping them into obedience. Johnny, you might be hurting someone's feelings. That ship has sailed. If you haven't been able to tell from my previous videos, I am much more concerned with truth and spiritual victory than I am with feelings, for feelings are used as weapons. Feelings are fabricated in order to get our way, and I don't have any proof of this, but my estimation would be 90% of feelings are based on subjective ignorance. We live in a world that through fear, was convinced to change our language, change our faith, and even change evil into good. It caused us to shut down the church and leave the strip clubs open. How afraid were we, right? And even change evil into good for fear that we might hurt someone's feelings. Those days are over. At least they're over for me. So if I'm hurting your feelings, you know what to do. I had people calling me when North Carolina shut down, and they were calling me from people in my congregation demanding, "Pastor, shut the doors." I hadn't heard the news. Why, I asked. They explained to me. Now, even after they explained to me, I thought, well, leprosy or high water. I'm not shutting the doors. Now, I did shut it down for 2 weeks, but when I was concerned that maybe we would be giving each other leprosy. After I did my homework and figured out very quickly what anybody with 10 minutes and an internet connection could have figured out, it was all bull. You can stay home all you wish, is what I told them. In fact, as far as I care, everyone who is afraid can stick their heads in the sand till the cows come home. The fearful, whether it hurts their feelings or not, cannot be allowed to control and run the earth. Only the brave can, if we want any kind of future. If they do, if the fearful do, then any tyrant, any truly brave person who wishes to shake their fist at the cowardly will have carte blanche draconian power over them. And I watched them in Walmart, Walgreens, and everywhere else doing exactly what they were told for no reason. Again, 10 minutes on the internet would have cured your fears. The fearful cannot be allowed to dictate cultural rules, nor can they be allowed to dictate language and communication. We allowed homosexuals who, if I explain to you why we call them that, we don't call them homolovables. We call them homosexuals to compare what they call a sex act to the beautiful union of man and woman and a child-producing paradigm is cowardly. If they do, then the powers that be, the powers that are under the dominion of Lucifer, whether they know it or not, will come up with some politically correct language in which to dictate the imaginative and creative abilities of those who might pose them a threat. Wait a minute. That already happened, didn't it? Time to wake up. And the only way to wake up is to love the fearful, but never, ever, ever let them call the shots, and never, ever, ever bow down to them. They will damn us all. I know of a church a while back that was, and probably still is, under the spiritual oppression of demonic fear. And they literally cast out anyone who dared stand firm on anything. But that is the nature of the fearful. They honestly feel courageous in their unabashed courage to remain cowards, and the culture to which they catered to more than they catered to the kingdom culture of Christ taught them that their fearful feelings and fearful obedience to absurdity was not only honorable, but loving, when it was anything but. It was all lies to put a fig leaf over their cowardliness. Well, now that all the facts are coming out, I wonder if any of them have had a change of heart. I doubt it. Fear also keeps the woke movement strong, and fear is what keeps the sinner hostage. You see, when the woke figured out that they had been, or when they figure out that they have been lied to, and that they willingly accepted the lie, and the same can be said of sinners on a same way but different start, they are faced with two decisions: persist in the madhouse and the asylum culture and damn everyone, including their own family and children and selves, and everyone around them and you and me, or die to themselves and be reborn into a new world of courage and into a new image. Let me give you an example. Examples always help me. And remember, everything I say about the woke can be said of the sinner. The problems are rooted in the same satanic simulation. The reason I separate the two is because wokeism is the spawn of sin. So we start out sinner, and then we each go our own way, and woke is one of the ways. The problems are rooted in the same satanic simulation. And I call it satanic simulation because the moment you have purchased any lie and built your understanding of your own reality and personality on it, the bigger you construct that lie, that paradigm, the more your world becomes simulation instead of reality. And I believe anybody who has been given the sight of Christ can look out at the world and go, I see the simulation. The problems that are rooted in the same satanic simulation and the answer and key are rooted in the same satanic simulation, and the answer and key to unlocking their chains from us and from others are held by the same high name. The keys are held by Jesus Christ. What if you innocently enough believe the woke deception? See, I don't believe that, especially if they weren't raised in a church, I believe that they wanted to do the right thing. Many of them, not the ones in control, not the ones who built the whole thing and know what I'm saying is true. No, but I believe that as a sinner, you can innocently enough, I don't know, go with me, understand my words and don't pick them apart too much. What if you innocently enough believed the woke deception when it happened? What if you innocently enough believed it? You could claim ignorance at the end of the day. What if you really couldn't see that everything they stand for and have pride in is an inversion of the truth and a rejection of observable reality, a reality that John and Virtue, our heroes, are first seen in today's chapter because their eyes have been cleared from crossing the uncrossable chasm. So pay attention. What if you had no spiritual training and no one around you to guide you to the feet of Jesus Christ? And in your mind, you truly just wanted to be the inclusive and loving person that the Luciferians and MSNBC told you that you would be if you swallowed their manure. Well, let's say that one day someone comes to your house and points out to you that your plate is full of manure. And they do this by simply pointing to observable reality. As an example, think of Matt Walsh, who recently simply asked, "What is a woman?" I can tell you. My two grandchildren, one of them can't even speak yet, can tell you. And that question alone is enough to make the woke go to war to preserve their income, their self-identity, their hideous actions, and their social acceptance. They don't stand. So now you know that you have been eating manure and you have been pretending to like eating manure. You go from woke to being actually a tiny bit awake for the first time as you're staring at your plate. And here's this person that pointed out to you that the plate's full of manure, and you're starting to wake up, but to admit that you've been eating manure. And this tiny bit of awakeness reveals that you castrated your child before their mind had developed enough to understand long-term circumstances. I don't think my numbers aren't too far off. Look it up. But I've heard that the human brain can't even understand long-term consequences until somewhere in their 20s. Have you seen what parents are doing to their children? One day we're going to call it abuse. And God help you, there'll be a lot of Christians forgiving you. But there'll be a lot of states of Mississippi that make you pay. Worse than that, you groom that child, and I don't just mean Mississippi. I'm using the line from Old Brother We're Out There. Well, God might be pretty forgiving, but the state of Mississippi, Worse than that, you groomed that child by your own hand. You groomed that child by your own manure-eating hand into insanity by telling him that doctors really just make guesses about your sex. Let's say that you now have the honor and respect of all the patients in the asylum for abusing your children and others. Let's say that you dress your boy up like a little girl and march them up and down a runway, and now you have an income. that is dependent on continuing to eat manure, dependent on staying asleep. Woke. What is your choice? How do you ever admit this to yourself? You must defend the lie. Do you know why the woke, when you address them, do nothing but scream at the top of the lungs and stick their fingers in their ears and call you all sorts of names? It's because at the end of the day, they know they do not have a leg to stand on. And all they can do is throw a tantrum like a child to have their way. You must defend the lie to your death in order to retain your own sanity. What if I told you you could find a way to sanity and mental health? You can die right now in the Christian meaning of that word. You can bravely approach the cross of Jesus Christ and share in his sufferings and be reborn anew. You may not be able to take a single insane action back, and you're going to wish you could. And that's part of not being able to admit it. But praise be to the Father in heaven, he might be able to roll some of it back because of the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus Christ. I do know this. I know God can roll it back if it's his will. But even if it's not his will is for you to be forgiven. Do you hear me? You can be forgiven. And in forgiveness, you can find sanity. And in sanity, you can be brought back to reality, out of the simulation of Satan and into the reality of Christ, and freed from the satanic and Luciferian order. And in being free and in being forgiven, free and forgiven enough to apologize and repay fourfold those whom you have harmed. And get this, the Lion of the tribe of Judah will be with you every step of the way to the ends of the earth. If you are a Christian, then the command not to fear is second only to the big 11 commandments. Yes, 11. Remember that our Lord and King added one more for us. Or rather, let us say that it is the rejection of fear that actually allows us to follow the 11 commandments at all. A cowardly person cannot even attempt. Even if stumblingly, the courageous have a chance of following, especially if we have taken into us the Spirit of Christ. We all are being perfected by Christ throughout time. As Paul said, and I'm paraphrasing him, I ain't perfect yet, but at least I'm trying. And know, at the end of the day, who can get me there and who will get me there one day. Slickest Steinsaga says to a befuddled John, who is seeing the dangerous road ahead clearly for the first time in his progression. Slickenstein Saga says, you all know that security is mortal's greatest enemy. And so to the progressives and vulgar globalists, I say, I don't want your security. I don't need your security. I won't have your security. And though it may cost me my life and my freedom, I will not receive your security because I stand on the security of Christ and you don't come close. I have greater things to do, more wondrous workings of God to behold, and more time to spend with lions. And to do all this, I have to make sure I don't let anyone scare me into accepting your security. Value what you will, but do not do what thou wilt. Do what the Savior tells you to do. He led the way. He taught us the path. And he did not say, love everybody, but do what you will. He said, love everybody, Father in heaven, thy will be done. If he says to walk on water, if Jesus tells you to walk on water, don't you look at him and tell him it's impossible. Get a running start and break through to the eternal life and excitement that the King of Kings has for all of his countrymen. You see, their father is the father of lies, and the father of flies, and the father of fear, and the father of the fearful. My father was a wandering Aramean, and my king had no place to lay his head because his adventure wouldn't allow it. My brothers raise their heads and shake their fist and scream into the faces of those that would have power over them. And all their sycophants, who is it that you say I shall serve? Huh. Know this, I will bow to the king and only to the king. Whom should I obey? You or God? Doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure that one out, does it? It is time that every spiritual leader in the kingdom of Christ refuses to be persuaded, intimidated, or moved by the yellow citizens of the satanic order. Speak truth without fear. Speak it with love, but speak it without fear. And speak it whether it offends the offended or not, because they're going to be offended no matter what you do. It's part of the game, and they know it. They can bow to their horned little Lord Fauntleroy if they like, and they can bow to the Bidens of the world if they wish. Me, I prefer the company of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. I originally put a quote here from another Lewis book, but I want to save it for the last thing. That being said, if you are reading along with us today, please turn to Book 10, Chapter 1. And as all of the books in this book, he starts with some famous quotations. From Plato, the Republic, he gives us this. And if, when he returned into the cave, he were constrained once more to contend with those that had always there been prisoners, in judgment of the said shadows, would they not mock him, and say of him that by going up out of the cave he had come down again with his eyes marred for his pains, and that it was lost labor for any so much as to try that ascent? Bernardus Sylvestris. First, I must lead the human soul through all the range of heaven, that she may learn how fortunate hath the turning of the wheel of change, how fate will never turn. And in the Anglican law, if I got this right, or what? No, it's William Law, not the Anglican law. William Law writes, let us suppose a person destitute of that knowledge which we have from our senses, observable reality. Let it be supposed that in his drought he puts gold dust in his eyes when his eyes smart. He puts wine into his ears, that in his hunger he puts gravel into his mouth, that in pain he loads himself with iron chains, that feeling cold he puts his feet in water, that being frightened of fire he runs away from it, that being weary he makes a seat of his bread. Let us suppose that some good being came to him and showed him the nature and use of all the things that were about him. Chapter 1. The same, yet different. Then I dreamed that the guide armed John and Virtue at all points and led them back through the country they had just been traveling and across the canyon again into this country. And they came up out of the canyon at the very place where the main road meets it by Mother Kirk's chair. I looked forward in the same direction where they were looking, expecting to see on my left the bare tableland rising to the north with Sensible's house a little way off, and on my right the house of Mr. Broad and the pleasant valley southward. But there was nothing of the kind. only the long, straight road, very narrow, and on the left crags rising within a few paces of the road into ice and mist, and beyond that, black cloud. On the right, swamps and jungle, sinking almost at once into black cloud. But as it happens in dreams, I never doubted that this was the same country which I had seen before. Although there was no similarity, John and Virtue came to stand with their surprise. Courage, said Slickestein Saga. You are seeing the land as it really is. It is long but very narrow. Beyond these crags and cloud on the north, it sinks immediately into the Arctic Sea, beyond which again lies the enemy's country. But the enemy's country is joined up with ours on the north by a land bridge called the Isthmus Sadisticus. And right amid that isthmus stands the cold dragon, the cold, costive, crustacean dragon, who wishes to enfold all that he can get within the curl of his body and then to draw his body tighter around it so as to have it all inside himself. And you, John, when we pass the isthmus, must go up and contend with him that you may be hardened. But on the south, as soon as it passes into these swamps and this other cloud, the land sinks into the southern sea, and across that sea also there comes a land bridge, the Isthmus Masochistius, where the hot dragon crawls, the expansive invertebrate dragon whose fiery breath makes all that she touches melt and corrupt. And to her, you, Virtue, must go down that you may steal her heat and be made malleable. Upon my soul, said John, I think Mother Kirk treats us very ill. Since we have followed her and eaten her food, the way seems twice as narrow and twice as dangerous as it did before. You all know, said the guide, that security is mortal's greatest enemy. It will do very well, said Virtue. Let us begin. Then they set out on their journey, and Virtue sang this song. Thou only art alternative to God, O dark and burning island among spirits, 10th hierarch, wormwood, immortal Satan, Ahriman, alone second to him, to whom no second else were known, being essential fire, sprung of his fire, but bound within the lightless furnace of thyself, bricked round to range in the reverberated heat from 7 containing walls, hence power thou hast to rival heaven. Therefore, accept the temperance of the eternal love. Only thy absolute lust is worth the thinking of. All else is weak disguisings of the wishful heart. All that seemed earth is hell or heaven. God is, thou art. The rest, illusion. How should man live save as glass to let the white light without flame the Father pass unstained, or else opaque, molten to thy desire, Venus infernal, starving in the strength of fire. Lord, open not too often my weak eyes to this. Chapter 2, The Synthetic Man. As they went on, Virtue glanced to the side of the road to see if there were any traces of Mr. Sensible's house, but there was none. It is just as it was when you passed it before, said the guide, but your eyes are altered. You see nothing now but realities. And Mr. Sensible was so near to non-entity, so shadowy even as an appearance, that he is now invisible to you. That mote will trouble your eyes no longer. I'm very surprised, said Virtue. I should have thought that even if he was bad, he was a singularly solid and foursquare kind of evil. All that solidity, said the guide, belonged not to him, but to his predecessors in the house. There was an appearance of temperance about him, but it came from Epicurus. There was an appearance of poetry, but it came from Horace. A trace of old pagan dignities lingered in his house. It was Montaigne's. His heart seemed warm for a moment, but the warmth was borrowed from Rabelais. He was a man of shreds and patches. And when you have taken from him what was not his own, the remainder equals naught. But surely, said Virtue, these things were not the less his own because he learned them from others. He did not learn them. He learned only catchy words from them. He could talk like Epicurus of spare diet, but he was a glutton. He had from Montaigne the language of friendship, but no friend. He did not even know what these predecessors had really said. He never read one ode of Horace seriously in his life. And for Rabelais, he can quote, "Do what you will," but he has no notion that Rabelais gave that liberty to his Thelemites on the condition that they should be bound by honor, and for this reason alone free from laws positive. Still less does he know that Rabelais himself was following a great steward of the olden days who said, "Habe caritatem et hoc quod vis," and least of all that this steward in his turn was only reducing to an epigram the words of his master when he said, "On these two commandments hang all the laws and the prophets." Fear is the mind killer, the soul killer, the culture killer, and the chains with which deviously, evilly smart people will line their pockets and ensure their children's futures on the backs of the cowardly, even if that means making a deal with the original murderer and lawless one, Old Scratch himself. If you have problems with fear, then I can tell you about the one who can cure you. I can tell you the armor with which to wear, and I can tell you the community in which to grow. But you already know that, don't you? Don't be afraid to embrace the Lion of the tribe of Judah and smell his sweet mane. And when he roars, grab on tight, for the journey has just begun. Lewis, in the Chronicles of Narnia, has a scene where Susan learns of the beginning of wisdom. The only proper fear of God. That story reads like this. Is he a man? Asked Lucy. Aslan a man, said Mr. Beaver sternly. Certainly not. I tell you, he's the king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who's the king of the beast? Aslan is a lion. The lion. The great lion. Oh, said Susan, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, and make no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he is good. He's the king, I tell you. Christ is king. Hail to the king. Godspeed.